This is the Los Osos Valley Garden Club January program. Our program tonight is Container Gardening Basics, flowers, succulents, blueberries, and citrus. During the program, please remain muted and your video turned off. Feel free to ask for questions in the chat and we can discuss them at the end of the program. Here are just a few announcements before we begin. Our mission is to promote gardening appreciation, civic beautification, environmental responsibility, and horticultural education. Your support by joining our club or donating is greatly appreciated. You can visit our website, lovgardenclub.org, to learn more about our activities. Feel free to check out our gardening resources page that has recently added some valuable information about rain gardens, landscaped areas designed to capture and filter stormwater before it runs off into storm drains. Rainwater gardens also help to recharge stores of groundwater in our aquifers, which are very much needed here in California due to our ongoing drought. Our next Zoom program, February 16th at 6:45, is Vertebrate and Insect Pests of Home Garden and Landscape, a live presentation by Kim Wilson, UC Master Gardener of SLO County. Mark your calendars because you will not want to miss this one. Do you struggle with pests in the garden? Kim Wilson will explain the basic principles of identifying vertebrate pests and how to control them safely. Then she will discuss the most common insect pests in the home, landscape, and garden and how to prevent and control them when needed, keeping the health of the environment in mind. And now for tonight's program, which will be presented by garden experts from 4 previously recorded videos. We will begin with Container Gardening 101, presented by Annie Hayes of Annie's Annuals, who will show us how to plant containers to create amazingly beautiful flower displays. Next, we will learn how to design a gorgeous succulent garden container from succulent expert Debra Lee Baldwin. Then Tom Spellman and Phil Pursel of Dave Wilson Nursery will demonstrate and discuss the finer points of growing blueberries and other berry plants in containers. Lastly, Angela from Growing in the Garden, an organic master gardener, will give us 11 tips for success when growing citrus in containers. And now I will share with you those videos. Okay, this will be Annie's Annuals. Give me just a sec to set it up.
Hi, I'm Annie Hayes of Annie's Annuals and Perennials, and today we're going to show you how we here at the nursery plant containers, which is pretty different than you see in gardening magazines in general. In gardening magazines, you'll see a pot that's about this big, right? And it'll have 10 different plants in it. One is a shade plant, one is a sun plant, or there's just too many plants. If you think about it, they're going to use up all those nutrients in that pot so fast. So we put one variety in each pot, and what you end up with is something like this, which looks like a container garden. And you have the freedom of moving the pots around, and you can arrange the colors and arrange the heights and the shapes as you like. The mistake that most people make and that you see in the magazines is that the pots are too small. You want to have enough room for the roots to grow and for there to be nutrition, and you want to use the best soil you can get. Don't go to the box store and get the cheapest soil you can buy, and buy planting mix. Big difference. Potting soil is really for houseplants. It compacts, it smushes down, and the water runs down the sides of the pot and doesn't get into the whole plant. You get a good planting mix at an independent nursery as opposed to those big box stores. You don't want to fill up the soil up to the very edge of the pot because the water is going to run over the edge, and it's nice to leave a space to add some compost. These are Yersinia anathoides, which is this plant right here. And it happens to look really, really good with anything bright blue, like this Anchusa capensis, blue angel. So, taking it out of the pot, and I always do this. Don't be afraid to do this. It just sort of gives the roots an idea that they're supposed to go out into the soil. See, making some space in there. There we go. We use the grapeseed compost here at the nursery, but any good compost will do. And just put a little compost. That gives them a little extra boost. It won't burn them, it won't hurt them. Be careful that you don't put it right against the stems, because that can rot the stems on some plants. But this will just make them so happy and make them take off really, really fast. And this is what it's going to look like in about a month. And I highly recommend always potting up one pot of Nicotiana lime green because it looks good with everything. It blooms for a very long time. You can cut it back and it will bloom again. It's just so super simple, and it makes everything around it look even better. And this is the size pot I would use for Nicotiana lime green. If you have a tall plant, 3 feet tall, something that big would go in a pot no smaller than this. So we've got this one set up for us. And I'm using my favorite tool, my hand. And here's a little something I do too. See, I got this one off the table out there in the nursery, and it's already spiking. Well, I'm not real thrilled about that. That's kind of like a little bolting kind of thing to me. So I will just snap that off, and that will force the plant to create more foliage and to bush out. Since they get so tall, you could do 1, you could do 2. But the trick is that they have plenty of root room, and the roots will stay nice and cool in this big pot, and they've got plenty of nutrition. I put some compost, and that's going to make them so happy. And this will, just like that, this will turn into this in about a month and a half. Very fast growing. You don't need anything special to do that. You just need good soil and compost. And so let's say you don't have any compost. Fish emulsion. They say on the bottle to put a tablespoon per gallon. Well, this is what I do. A lot more than they say. And it really works, and it doesn't burn the plants. I don't do this when I first plant them in general, but if they're starting to look yellow or they're starting to look hungry, give them a little fish emulsion, and they will just jump right back into sheer happiness. So let's recap. We want to have one variety per pot. We want to have the right size pot. We want to have good soil, planting mix, not potting soil, and some nutrition like compost or fish emulsion. And that's it. Just put them together and be creative and have fun. All right, so now we're going to take a walk around the nursery, and we're going to see some sample pots, some beautiful sample pots to help you get inspired. Come on. So here we have a great example of a container garden. Everything you see here is planted in a container, and we just move them around. Look at these poppies in a pot. Isn't this beautiful? See the size container? This is one of our pet plants in the nursery. It's a companion relative that loves shade. It's called Symphyandra zanziger. Isn't it beautiful? It's just blooming its head off. Right size pot and a little bit of compost. And you can see this is one of our sample pots here in the nursery. Somebody else has planted Nicotiana lime green probably. And you can see that they've put that black, beautiful black grapeseed compost on top. Here's another garden with a lot of blue in it. I think that's 3 delphiniums in there. That's Delphinium Royal Aspirations. And that was probably planted in February. It's now May. And are they not spectacular? So you can just see how healthy all this looks and how pretty it is. And here's something that isn't coming into bloom yet, but it still looks good because it gives the eye a rest. It gives something green to look at, or what's called a foil. Wow, look at these. These are sweet peas in containers. There's 3 plants in a barrel. And are they not insane? They're so big. This is Canary Creeper Nasturtium. And the reason it looks so good is look at the size of that basket. Can you see that in there? And people are always telling us that their hanging baskets look terrible. That's because the ones you get at the garden centers and even at nurseries are just like this big, which dry out really fast. But if you put them in a nice big pot, your plants will go nuts like this.
Hope you enjoyed that one. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. And that will be Debra Lee Baldwin with Succulent Planters.
Hello, I'm Debra Lee Baldwin, author of Succulent Container Gardens, a Timber Press release, and I'm at Oasis Water Efficient Gardens in Escondido, California. I'm going to be using the wonderful plant palette that they have here at the nursery to show you how to create a great succulent container garden. So we're going to start with the pot, and I have a piece of window screen. You could even use a piece of paper towel to hold the soil in so it doesn't fall through the hole in the pot. So we're going to start by mixing our potting soil. I have just regular potting soil that you can buy at any nursery, and some pumice. It's used to absorb moisture in horse stalls. Now pumice is a volcanic rock. It's very lightweight and it leavens the soil. It makes it lighter so that it's faster draining, which is what succulents like. So see, here you can see how I've mixed it, and you pretty much have half and half pumice and potting soil. Just going to dump that right into the pot, and then the fun starts. We get to select our plants. And I saw this stunning Afterglow Echeveria in the nursery. Isn't it beautiful? And I'm just going to slide this out of its pot. And I have a bucket there to catch the soil. And I'm going to do a symmetrical floral style arrangement, meaning that my main element is going to be right in the middle. Now, if your composition is going to have a front and a back, in other words, you're going to put it in a place in your garden, maybe on a patio table, then you want to tip the main rosette toward the viewer. Otherwise, if you're going to be seeing the composition from all sides, you would just put it straight up like that. Now, as I was going through the nursery, oh, there are so many choices. And I thought, well, this could be interesting. Look at the colors in that. Now, keep in mind that your most important design principles are contrast and repetition. So here we've got some contrast going on with the red of the Graptocetum. Isn't that lovely with that? Look at the red with the purple of the plant. And we're just going to cram these in here pretty tightly because we're creating a look of lushness. And our sedum is going to be our filler. when we have any gaps. I like to use 3 plants minimum in a composition. Always think of odd numbers. They're more pleasing to the eye. I don't know why, but if you go with 1, 3, or 5, you usually have a pretty good result. Now these will eventually trail over the side over time. You know, when I was going through the nursery, I saw these, I thought, oh, that might be really interesting. But look, of the 2, I think this one's going to work better because it has some red in the stems that is going to look really good with the red in the graftosedum. And I'm just going to take the different pieces of the sedum and just use it as a filler. And this is pretty much even, pretty much a balanced arrangement. You don't have to do that. You could have something more off to one side if you wanted. Just play with it. See what you like to do. See what looks good. Okay, so I think we're just about done. And remember, this sedum's going to cascade. It's going to be beautiful over time. Yeah, I have one left. Where should I tuck? I'll just tuck that right in there. Okay, now, one thing that a lot of people don't think about when they're doing an arrangement is a top dressing. I have a palette of top dressings over here. Have fun with your top dressings. And this is basically just some rocks that you tuck in. You don't really want your top dressing to call too much attention to itself. This is probably my best choice. It's subtle. It picks up some of the warm tones in the plants. And I'm just going to drop it in here and there to cover up any gaps in the soil. And just add that little bit of polish. Now, you just want to dribble the water enough to just get it nice and moist and help the roots settle. The idea with succulents is that you want to keep the soil as moist as a wrung out sponge. And there we have our finished composition. I'm Debra Lee Baldwin, author of Succulent Container Gardens from Timber Press, and I'm at Oasis Water Efficient Gardens in North San Diego County, a great place to find a whole palette of succulent plants.
I hope you enjoyed that one, and you can see very different conditions for succulents. Okay, we're going to move on to the third video, and that's going to be how to plant container blueberries for small spaces. This is the Dave Wilson Nursery.
We're here at Dave Wilson Nursery's Hickman Yard this morning, and we're going to show you what you can do with blueberries for home gardeners. So we've got some blueberries that we're just about ready to start shipping. These are 1-year plants in our 4x9 grower pots, and this is the size that will be distributed out to the retail nurseries here in another couple weeks or a month. We just love this size of plant. It will fruit right away. You're going to get flowers and fruit on all this wood that's going to go dormant here this winter. Couple of things that are really important to success with blueberries, and I know we've talked about this before, but number one, fast draining soil. You don't want a pot that doesn't have holes in it. You don't want soil that's too heavy or has too much clay. You want to make sure the water goes right through and out the bottom of the drainage holes. The next most important consideration is an acidic soil base. So we like to use a component of different soils to blend to come up with our mix for blueberries. So the first component, a good organic type potting soil, and this has some sand, it has some pumice, it has some perlite and some organic material. The next component,
good old-fashioned peat moss, just sphagnum peat moss.
Regular ground sphagnum peat moss. And then the third component is a finely ground bark, an orchid bark or a
Pathway bark.
pathway type bark like
Small.
this. We'll mix these in equal proportions, 1/3 of each to come up with our final blend, and then we'll plant our plants into these containers. So Phil's already started on putting some of our mix together.
But I'll show you kind of how easy it really is. Just, got an empty number 5 container. This is not scientific, so I'll just go ahead and start off with the potting soil. Dump it in. Then go ahead and scoop in the sphagnum peat moss.
Make sure when you're using the peat moss that comes in a bale like this, that you're crunching it up and breaking it up.
Throw that in there. Gives it good acidity. And finish it off with some pathway bark. This is going to give it the good drainage. All this stuff available at your local garden center. We'll get the base mix there, and then we like adding in a good fertilizer. Benefits of something like this, Tom.
A starter blend fertilizer. So number one thing on blueberries, no high nitrogen. You want a low nitrogen fertilizer. So something where the phosphorus and the potash are 3 or 4 times higher than the nitrogen level. So this is a 3-12-12. We also want to make sure that we have a humic acid base. This is a humic acid based product, and it has small amounts of trace elements. So zinc, iron, manganese, a little soil sulfur. So these are all things that will help to keep the soil conditions acidic and a good starter blend to put out a root system. It's still warm enough that these plants are going to root out this fall. They're going to start to fill in the dimensions of this container so that when they bloom out in the spring, they'll already be working off an established root system. And you'll get fruit off these plants right away. You'll have fruit off these plants next year in April or May. So we want to make sure we're giving them a good start.
Let me just go ahead and add a little bit of this in there.
Probably for the 3 number 5 size containers of the mixed media, we probably want 1/2 pound or so of that fertilizer blended in there. Maybe even a little bit more. Since it is low nitrogen, we're not going to burn with it, but we don't want to push the plants this time of year. We just want to give them a start so that they can root out into the new containers and then establish over the winter.
I'll just do 3 right here, get a good start. And then, pretty simple from here, just gonna mix it up, get a nice good mix here.
Now, one thing that's important, all 3 of these elements had a fair amount of moisture. The potting soil was nice and moist, the bark had some moisture, and most important, the peat moss had some moisture. If you're using dry peat moss, you want to soak it first. You want to make sure that it's really wet before you use it. Peat moss doesn't normally take in irrigation very well if you're starting off with a dry product. So make sure that you have a fair amount of moisture in the soil before you begin. Another thing you want to make sure of when you're transplanting young plants like this is that the root ball that you're transplanting is also moist. We never want to transplant a dry root ball. So make sure that you pre-irrigate the plant so you have a nice moist root ball. We've got our container here, and we're going to plant a 2-in-1 combination. This variety is Emerald, which is a nice large fruiting blueberry. This variety is Sunshine Blue. So Sunshine Blue is a very compact plant. It's a small berry, very, very flavorful. Even though these varieties are all self-fruitful, you get much better production if you grow at least 2 or 3 or 4 varieties together. So that cross bloom between the varieties will give you a definite increase in production.
Kind of like in the size of the container too. This is probably for 2 is about the smallest that you want to go with, plant 2.
Right.
You can go ahead and, get a bigger container, a little more room. Get in the wine barrel, you can do 3.
3 or 4. I've done most of my half wine barrels with 4 varieties in the barrel.
Okay.
So lots of great
Yep.
cross-pollination, lots of successive ripening berries throughout the season. But this is a good size container for 2. And since this root ball is about 9 inches deep, container's about 12 inches deep, so we're going to start off with a couple of good shovelfuls of media in the container before we set the plants. So that's probably a good start. Now, it's okay on these to even plant them a little high. So you don't necessarily want to put this root ball down below the new soil level that you're establishing in this container. So you can just set them opposite each other, put them right about to the top of the rim of the container, and then start just packing some soil around them. once these are done, I want to see this little 4-inch root ball. I want that exposed on the surface. I don't want that buried. I want to make sure that those top roots can oxygenate and breathe well. The worst thing you can do is bury that too deep, and then you create an anaerobic condition where that soil can't breathe and you don't have any porosity in it. Even though you have good drainage, you can still have rot that way. So make sure that you've got that top of that existing 4-inch container, or whatever size you're transplanting out of, that you have that exposed right at the surface.
So we don't want to have too much of a high pressure, right? We don't wash
No,
all the
low
soil
the
out we
media
just
out,
put
yeah.
in there. So
Slow and steady. So make sure that the soil ball is fully saturated. Make sure you kind of poke all the air pockets out of there. You don't want little air pockets in there. So
you can see how fast draining this is right now. You know,
It's
that's
going
what the
right
bark
through.
does.
So, and when you do this initial irrigation, you want to irrigate, let it sit for a few minutes, come back and irrigate again, maybe even do it 3 or 4 times, so that you know you've now totally saturated this new root zone, and that'll give you nice, quick expansion of that root system.
Yeah, it's good for right now.
As far as pruning on these, they're a little imbalance. You could come in here and make a couple of pruning cuts, but the one consideration you will always want to consider with blueberries is every cut that you make now in the fall or in the winter is taking away fruiting wood for next spring. So for me, the plants look pretty good. You've got a nice ratio in the container, and all these tips are where we're going to get bloom next spring. So I'm not going to do any pruning right now. I'm going to leave these alone. I'm going to let them flower. I'm going to take advantage of some berries. Where if I was planting an established fruit tree or a larger fruit tree, an apple, a peach, a persimmon, a nectarine, an apricot, I wouldn't want it to fruit the first year. But these are nice little tight, well-established plants, and they're perfectly fruiting able, and we'll be eating blueberries off of these by April or May.
So what we got here going on here, Tom?
This is one of the oddball varieties in the blueberry family. It's not a blueberry, it's a pink blueberry.
Okay.
So we've talked about this one before. It's pink lemonade is the variety, but it does bloom, inner bloom, and will cross-pollinate with the other southern highbush blues.
Okay.
So since we have those two varieties together, this is a little bigger. Isn't that a beautiful plant? I mean, look at that.
It
For
is.
a 1-year plant.
Nice
I mean,
structure.
so now we have a variety that will interbloom with our blues, and it gives you an alternate type berry. So you could easily grow this one in combination. If you had a half barrel or a larger container, put 3 or 4 in there. You could put a pink in with a couple of blues, or you can do it separately like this. So we're gonna grow this in a separate container of its own, and just keep it close by so that there's plenty of opportunity for the bees to pollinate in between the varieties.
And the other thing is, there are so many great options for pots. Our first one was the classic Italian clay pot, right?
Yep,
That's what
terracotta,
everyone.
yeah.
Now, I mean, you can go out to any independent garden center, and they have, all these different colored pots that you can put in there and kind of really dress up the patio. And that's the whole idea.
The selection of containers is more diverse and more dynamic
Than ever before, yeah.
You've got
Container
wood
gardening
containers,
is-
plastic containers, you've got high fire ceramics, you've got terracottas, you've got Mexican style pottery, you've got all these different types of containers.
Yep.
One thing that I think is really important that I always take into consideration when choosing a container, especially something like this that I know within a couple of years or 3 years I'm going to transplant out. So I don't want a container that has a tapered side that tapers inward. I don't want an urn type container. I want something where the base is narrower than the rim. That way you can turn this up on its side,
Pop it
roll it
right
a couple
up.
of times, pop that plant right out.
Right.
If you have an urn style container, and some of these containers are spendy,
They are.
you can spend $100, $200, $300 on
They look
containers.
great at the very beginning, but it's what
Absolutely.
you're gonna have to get a hammer.
One-shot deal. Yeah, the only way to transplant out of that pot is to break that
Right.
pot.
So
Make sure you're choosing tapered sides where the base is narrower than the lip or the rim.
So this one we're just gonna go ahead, simple planting, same mix, equal parts bark, peat moss, organic potting soil, a little bit of grow fertilizer, and let's get it done.
Same thing, we added some soil to the bottom of the container before we set the plant in. Get this packed around the sides nicely, get all the air pockets out.
And you know, it might seem like people are like, isn't that kind of a big container? I'm always told to go up one size. You know, the mix we're using, the whole idea is that it's fast draining. So we're not worried about this container being too big. This is going to grow right into it. You'll get a good 3-4 years of growing in here if you want. But with this fast draining mix, this container size is not too big. Just like that?
No, I think it's perfect.
Yeah.
And the other thing you always want to take into consideration for something like this that's more shrub form than it doesn't have a tree stem or something. So you want to make sure that you're maintaining a balance. You're going to do your pruning on these in the summer after the crop has been harvested, and you want to prune this plant back to keep it into a balance with the size of the container you've given the plant to grow in. So top to root ratio should be very close.
Yep.
That's going to give you longevity. That's going to allow this plant to grow in this container for at least 3, if not 4 years.
Yeah. So like you say, our plants come in 4-inch containers. If you were to put this in a 6-inch container, it's already too small.
Absolutely.
So this
It'd
is-
outgrow that in a couple of months.
Yep.
So we don't have to stick to blueberries on this. This
No.
is a nice size container, nice decorative container, nice high glaze on the outside, and this is a Baby Cakes blackberry. It's one of our bushel and berry varieties, so it's not a big vigorous vine. It's more a shrub form blackberry that'll produce again on young wood. It'll produce on these tips that are going to harden up this winter.
Right. It was hybridized for container gardening, just like
Exactly.
its counterpart, raspberry shortcake, which is the
Raspberry
bush
shortcake.
raspberry.
So we do have those selections that are grown specifically for container culture on the blackberries and on the raspberries. And this one, the flavor on this one is excellent.
It is.
I would compare this to any of the standard blackberry varieties. Very productive, good size fruit, and really nice flavor.
Yep. How about the soil? So, you know, we got this mix right here, and it's custom for blueberries. Good for this too?
I think we're good for this. You know, it's going to be slightly acidic. It still drains really well.
Yeah.
So
Drainage is key in container gardening.
any container culture, you want to make sure you have really good drainage. So I think this mix is going to work just fine for the blackberry as well as the blueberries.
Get this thing planted up.
Again, get all that soil packed down so you get the air pockets out.
A little more. Keep it good.
Yeah, a little bit more. Again, we're going to leave that existing root ball just barely exposed at the surface. So after you irrigate it down a couple of times, you're going to be able to see that original 4-inch square outline of that root ball. You don't want to cover that. You don't want to bury that. You want to make sure that you're keeping it right at the soil surface or just slightly above. Man, I can't wait. We're going to have fresh blueberries, pink blueberries, and blackberries this coming spring. I'm hungry already.
All right, watering this in, Tom. You know, a lot of people ask about watering and how you should do it, and
Well,
Yep.
you know, Phil, there's so many variables on that. I mean, you know, how fast draining is your soil? What's the weather like? Is the plant in a vigorous stage of growth? So
how much
always,
sun, how much shade.
always the best way to irrigate is to check the soil moisture before. Get a moisture meter, or just, you know, put your finger down or a knife blade down into that container and see what the moisture level is like at 2, 3, 4 inches below the surface. You don't want it to ever go bone dry, but you want to make sure that it goes just slightly dry in between irrigations. So and when you do irrigate, make it count, make it thorough.
So like this right here, just planted it, knowing that, you know, we want to thoroughly soak it.
Yes.
You know, get its, you know, the soil. We don't want wicking away. We want everything to be in
Right.
line. So you can see right now it's drained through, and you know, maybe we'll pack it down a little bit more if it needs a little bit of soil.
Just top it off a
Just
little
top it
bit,
off, but-
irrigate it again a couple more times right away so that
Yep.
we know there's no air pockets and that soil is
Yeah,
saturated.
at this point, you really can't overwater it when you first put it in there.
The first 3 or 4 days you could basically set it in a bucket of water almost and you'd be fine. But
Yeah.
after that, you're going to want it to be able to drain out thoroughly, and you're going to want it to go just slightly dry in between irrigations.
And so something like this, after it finishes fruiting in the summertime, great time, just go ahead. You're out there hedging everything else. Just
Sculpt
make
it
this
back.
a nice, you know, hedge it out.
Yep.
So push out new growth for next year.
Absolutely. So enjoy your berries, You could lots of options for small space gardening. You can do these on a patio. You can do them on a balcony. You don't need a big lot to grow fresh fruits and berries in your backyard. Have fun with it and enjoy fresh fruit every day that you can. Lots of great information on our website. If you want more information on growing fruit trees, caneberries, blueberries, any of the items that we're producing, make sure to follow us on the website. Go to www.davewilson.com and enjoy. Lots of great information there, and we want you to take advantage of it.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that one. We just have one more to go. And that one is the citrus in containers, 11 tips for success.
Adding citrus to your garden is a great idea, especially if you live in a warm climate. Growing citrus in containers means those trees will take up less space and we can add more types of citrus to our garden. If you have problems with poor soil and drainage issues, if you live in a cooler climate, you can move that container indoors when it gets too cold for citrus. For those reasons and more, I love growing citrus in containers, and in today's video I'm going to share my best tips so you can grow them too. But if we haven't met before, my name's Angela from Growing in the Garden, and I love to share garden inspiration and helpful tips so you can be successful in your own garden. The first tip is to choose a large enough container. Citrus plants can grow large, and you need plenty of room for those plants' roots to grow. The pot should be twice as wide as the citrus nursery pot to give the roots room to grow. A half wine barrel is my favorite choice for growing citrus. Look for a container that's about 2 feet wide and 2 feet deep. If you're going to be moving your citrus around, make sure that that container has some sort of a dolly or way for you to move it. Whatever pot you use should have several holes in the bottom of it. The quickest way to kill your citrus tree is to drown those roots. When is the best time to plant citrus? Citrus does best when planted after danger of frost has passed in the spring. That gives the roots time to adjust to their container before the hottest months of the year. The next tip is to understand which varieties of citrus are going to do better in a container. Buy citrus trees grafted onto dwarf rootstock. Those trees will naturally be smaller in size than full-size citrus trees. Dwarf trees produce the same size and quality of fruit, but yield about half as much fruit. So when you're ready to buy that citrus tree, if you see roots circling the inside of that container, do not buy that plant. That tree has been in the pot too long and will not transition well to your container. Look for young, healthy roots. It's also a good idea to buy smaller trees for a couple of reasons. Smaller trees are easier to plant and will transition better into a container than larger trees that are more established. Almost any variety of citrus will grow well in a container, but certain varieties will grow faster and outgrow their container quicker. Smaller types of citrus that do well in containers include improved Meyer lemon, Bear's lime, mandarins, Australian finger limes, or kumquats. All of those trees are naturally a little bit smaller and will last longer in containers. Native soil and regular garden soil are too heavy for container-grown citrus. That type of soil is not going to provide the air that those roots need to grow well. The best type of soil is a potting mix with a combination of compost, coconut coir or peat moss, and vermiculite or perlite. A soil that is all organic matter, like planting in all compost, will break down too quickly and become compacted. It's important to put your container in the best location. You want to make sure that citrus get plenty of sunlight. They need at least 8 hours of sunlight to grow well. A sunny, wind-free location is the best spot to put citrus, especially if that location gets morning sun and a little bit of afternoon shade. If you live in a hot climate like here in the low desert, because containers heat up more quickly, it's important to provide some afternoon shade. If you live in a cooler climate, then you want to make sure that that container is getting as much sunlight as possible. A wall that gets reflected heat is a great location. Once you have your tree, your container, and your soil, you are ready to plant. Fill the bottom half of the container with soil and gently remove the pot from around that citrus tree. Loosen the bottom little bit of roots on the bottom of that tree, but keep the root ball intact. Put the citrus tree in place in the middle of that container. Most citrus are grafted onto a rootstock, and if you look, you can see that graft line on the trunk of the tree. Make sure that the graft is above the soil line. Here in the low desert, containers dry out so quickly, and I add oyas to all of my containers. So if you're going to add an oya, planting is the time to do that. When you fill that halfway up with soil, at that point you're going to add in your oya so that the top of the oya is level with the top of the plant. And then fill up that container with soil, leaving an inch or two at the top. Cover any visible roots with soil, and then mulch that container with wood chips or additional compost. Keep that mulch and soil pulled back from the trunk of the tree. Once everything's all planted, then it's time to water your citrus. I use a shower attachment and water slowly and deeply. You want to make sure that that soil has a chance to absorb all of that moisture. If you have an oya, fill that oya all the way up, and also water all of the surrounding soil. The roots in that container rely on you to keep it well watered. Use a moisture meter to give you a more exact idea of how wet the roots are. Each time you water, water thoroughly, making sure the water is being absorbed and not just draining out the hole in the bottom. Pay attention to your plants. They're going to tell you if their water needs aren't being met. How often you water is influenced by the weather. During hotter, drier conditions, you're going to water your citrus in containers more often. During the cooler months of the year, your citrus in containers is going to need much less water. Having an oya in place allows you to go a little bit longer between waterings, and in our incredibly hot summers, it keeps that citrus from drying out as quickly. My next tip is to feed your citrus regularly. Because you are watering citrus more often and that excess water is draining out of those bottom holes, nutrients are also being washed away. Citrus roots can't go looking for other sources for nutrition. You have to give it to them. Use an organic fertilizer formulated for citrus. That's going to have some of those extra micronutrients that citrus trees need. Fertilize citrus in containers about once a month during the growing season. My next tip is all about pruning your container grown citrus. You may not need to prune citrus at all, but if you need to prune, the best time to prune is in the spring after danger of frost has passed. If you expose any bark to sunlight, or if any bark is already exposed to sunlight, it's important to wrap or paint that bark to protect it from the sun. So when you prune citrus in containers, you are pruning the suckers below that graft union. Those suckers will grow straight up and sap energy from the tree. All citrus varieties are frost tender and need to be protected from freezing temperatures. Citrus should be brought indoors or covered with a frost cloth when nighttime temperatures go below 35 degrees. Citrus in containers are more susceptible to frost damage because they don't have that added insulation that trees do when they're grown in the ground. Cover your citrus all the way, drape it over the container and all the way to the ground to trap that radiated heat if we have a cold night that goes below freezing. If you live in a cold climate where temperatures regularly go below freezing, you need to bring that citrus indoors and then provide additional light. Move the pot back outside after danger of frost has passed in the spring. Citrus trees naturally self-thin and will drop fruit throughout the year depending on the environment. It's possible to get a fruit or two from those container-grown citrus the first couple of years. In subsequent years, citrus harvests will increase in size. How can you tell when citrus is ripe? Learn the harvest window for your particular kind of citrus for your area. And then the best way to tell if citrus is ripe is to try one and see. If it's not quite ready, leave the remaining fruits on a little bit longer. Citrus stays ripe on the tree for several weeks and up to several months. When citrus begins to soften and fall off from the tree, that's the time you need to get all the remaining citrus off the tree. Growing citrus in containers means that almost anyone can plant and grow a citrus tree. Thank you so much for watching.